Hello everyone, we have to discuss about the men's answer writing preparation. GS पेपर 1 मेंस आंसर राइटिंग प्रिपरेशन देख लेते हैं. Hello everyone, we have to discuss about that GS पेपर 1 मेंस आंसर राइटिंग प्रिपरेशन. हम क्या 10th नंबर पेज नंबर 10th पे थे. क्वेश्चन देख लेते हैं. Analyze the impact of the climate driven vegetation changes on the human. Changes on human. Changes on humans and migrations and the rise and falls of dynasty in the ancient India. 10-minute introductions. In ancient India, climate driven vegetation changes profoundly and influence the migrations patterns and the socio-political dynamics of civilizations, often the determining the stability and declines of the dynastic powers body. Impact of the climate driven vegetation changes on human migrations. Declines of the Indus Valley civilizations 1900 BCE and the demised and monsoons activities led to declares the agricultural productivity and water scarcities, promoting water scarcity, prompting and large scale migration eastwards and towards the fertile Ganga, Yamuna plains and EG sediments. Core studies near the Mohenjo-daros and showed the declining monsoons, rainfall linkings and its to the dryings up of the Saraswati's rivers and which forced migration and easternward settlement shifts. Drought and changing the rivers and courses in the Indus and valleys forces communities to the relocate and to the more stable and agriculturality and viable Ganga basins and markings other significant settlement shift, e.g. archaeological findings in the Rakhi Gadis and the reveals the shift of Haryana's and Harappas and populations to areas near the Ganga and Yamuna basins, adapting to more and the reliable water sources. ASI Archaeological Survey of India formation of Vedic society as the vegetations in the northwestern regions becomes the unsustainable in the Indo-Gangetic plains offered either stable environment for developing agricultural society forming the core of Vedic cultures. And Rig Vedic text refers to the fertile Ganga basin and indicating yearly Vedic migrations due to favorables and vegetation pattern in the regions. Impact on the pastoralism and movement. Changes in vegetation impact and grazing lands in northwest India and leading the pastoral communities to migrate towards more vegetation and stable grazing regions in northern and central India. Studies from the Rajasthan and the Thar desert suggested that the vegetation's decline deadlines pastoralism and groups adapted by moving towards the Himalayas. towards the Himalayas and the foothills, adoptions of new crops in Ganga basins, the arrivals of migration populations and introduce new the farming practices and crop types to the Ganga basin and support by the fertile land and the predictables predictable monsoon patterns, e.g., exhibitions at the Hastinapurs and show the evidence of early rice cultivations, which allowed and migration from the Indus Valley to the Thrips. Climate-driven vegetation changes on the rise and falls of the dynasty. The agriculture dependency of dynasties and unsigned dynasties and dependent on the stable agriculture's outputs, making them the vulnerable to vegetation changes due to climate shifts and directly impacting economic and stabilities, e.g. the late and the Harappan period show other deadline in the agriculturals in the Indus regions beginnings and dynastic control and leading to regions fragmentations shift in political centers. As climates introduced changes made the northwestern regions less the habitable dynasties and emergings in the more and fertile Ganga Yamuna plains and markings a significant political shift. The transitions from the Harappa to Vedic sustainables in the Ganga basins laid the foundation for new the dynasties and cultural development in the area. Adaptation through new the agricultural practices early the dynastics and society adapt to the climate's variations by diversified and crops the situate to the Ganga's basin and the strengthening there's the agricultural foundations, e.g. chard and rice the remains in the Dove and region suggest that the post-Harappan society and diversified crops to the withstand and varying climates and patterns. Vulnerability to the deadlines due to the resources scarcity and the diminished and the agricultural resources. Male the dynasties in the northwestern and the vulnerable to the deadline and beginnings. There's the economics and the military power. The deadline of Harappan civilization is linked to the reduced and productivities of the Saraswati regions due to the climate strength impacting trades and the sustains and rise of Ganga basin and dynasties, stable monsoon patterns in the Ganga basin and supported agriculture prosperities, paving the way for the early dynasty to establish and consolidate their the power, e.g. Mahajanpadas and such as the Magdhas and the thrives due to the abundant resources in the Ganga plains and which offered either favorable climates and vegetation for sustainable governance and history and the archaeology division ASI conclusion. Unsigned Indian military migratories and shift and dynastics and changes reveals and how the climates drives vegetations pattern shapes and human the society recognized and thus the historical impact highlights the enduring influences of environmental factor on social and political stabilities, emphasizing the need for the environmental resiliences in modern society. Question: highlight the architectural contributions of the Lodi dynasty and their the significance in the evolution of Indo and Islamic architectures. 10 minutes. And introductions: the Lodi dynasty 1451 and 1526 pioneered the distinct and architectural style that combine the simplicities and system symmetry and the functionalities and bridging the gap between the Sultanate and the Mughal and the architectural traditions. Body architectural contributions for the Lodi dynasty. Fir and the Sikandar and the Lodi and tombs. Aid the Lodi gardens and the octagonal tombs and for the simplicity and harmonies. The Lodi rulers and the popularized and octagonals tomb and which the symbolized and the symmetries and where the designed and for the visuals balance. The tomb of the Sikandars Lodis and one of the first and the octagonal tombs and with other garden settings in Delhi. Integrations of landscapes gardens with tombs and Lodi Tombs were often surrounded by garden emphasizing the spiritual connections to paradise as per and the Islamic beliefs. The Lodi Gardens, Delhi and remains are the prime example of their the early landscapes, tomb the architectures, low domes and impact proportions, Lodi and structures often features and the squares domes to the produce the pressures on wall and achieve architectural stabilities. The Bhara and the Gumbad done domes in Delhi and highlighted this the innovations. Use of local materials and simple designs. They prioritized the sandstones and rubble and masonry and incorporating cleans and the geometric patterns and rests trained and organizations, e.g. the sis and the gumbat adorned adorned with blue and the tiles and plains the facades focus on the mosque architectures with open the spaces. Lodi mosques included the spacious courtyard and the simpler and facades to serve the practicals and spiritual needs. The Bhara and the Gumbat Mosque and the early example of the large and prayers halls and combined with the minimalist styles significant in the evolution of Indo-Islamic architectures. Transitionals and architectural bridging sultanates and Mughal styles and Lodi the innovations laid the groundworks for Mughal architectures and blendings the Afghan and Indian elements, the octagonals and layouts and gardens tomb design the influences the Humayun's tombs 1565 introduce of the Charbagh garden layout. Their emphasis on gardens as part of tomb and complexes evolved into the Mughals and the Paradise Gardens concept. The design of Lodi Gardens reflects and early the Charbagh features. Simplicity over the extravagances, the Lodi and styles emphasize the functionalities and minimized movings away from the ornates and the embellishment and seen in earlier Sultanate architecturals. Easy structure like sheets and gumbat focus on the modest and aesthetics and with the practical designs. Blendings Indians craftsmanships and with Islamic traditions. Integrated Indians techniques like the entry and the kit stones and latices jalis and with the Islamic architectural principles, e.g. use of jalis in tombs and widow for the ventilations and design in Delhi structures. Regional influence on other the sultanates and inspired the regional adaptations in the Shaki and Dakkan and the Sultanates and particularly in tomb and mosque designs. The Gol Gumbad in Bijapur reflects the structural ideas or originating from the Lodi designs. Conclusion. The Lodi architecture's legacy represented a seamless blend of the functions and simplicities and the aesthetics appeals. By the integrating innovations with the traditions, there the structures not only the defined there the era and but also the paved the way for the news of Mughals architectures. Analyze the impact of the colonial rule on India, the perceptions of its the culture heritage. How has this and the perceptions evolved in the post and independent era? 10 minutes. Introduction. India's culture heritage are testament to its the ancient civilization faced the systematic lactate and the distortions under the colonial rule. Post independence, the nations embarked on the missions to reclaim and the celebrated its the legacy, transforming heritage into a source of unity and pride. Body impact of the colonial rule on India's cultural heritage perceptions. Eurocentrics and narratives and dominions. British colonizers and promoted the notions that Western arts, architectures, and knowledge were the superiors. e.g. James Mill History of the British India and the dismissed the Indias and cultural past as the unscientific and the stagnant exploitations and the destructions of monuments. Colonial policies often led to neglect or the deliberated destructions of heritage structures, demolitions of indigenous and structure for buildings, railways lines, or the urban expansions like in the Delhi during the 1857 revolt. Cultural fragmentation through divided and rule. The colonial government created the religious and the racial divisions, eroding the shared and ownerships of cultural heritage, e.g. partitions, narratives, and ignored the sign critics natures of shared heritage like the Sufi shrines or composite art form. Introduction of Western educations and Indians the traditional knowledge systems and vernacular arts and where the sidelines in favor of English educations. Decline of institutions like schools and madrasas in favor of British styles. Universities such as the Universities of Calcutta 1857. Institutionalization of heritage under the British control. Hold the Archaeological Survey of India ASI 1861 documented monuments. It was the primarily to serve colonial interest, often neglecting local custodianships. John and the Marshalls ASI prioritized and the Greco Buddhist art over the indigenous form. Evolution of perceptions in post and the independence era. Post independence and India made the deliberated efforts to restore its the cultures and the pride and heritage and reversing the colonials narratives. Nationalism revivals of heritage. India's leaders emphasize the reclaiming cultural pride to the instead and nation unity. Jawaharlal Nehru's and visits in the discovery of India and highlighted India and composed the cultures and its the continuities and strengthening institutional frameworks. India's created the organizations like the Archaeological Survey of India and the revitalized in 1947 and the Indian National Trust for Arts and Culture Heritage intact 1984 to conserve cultural heritage, e.g. ASI led the restorations of Sanchi Stupas 1915. Constitutional and legal measures. The Constitutional introduced the safeguard for the heritage protection under the Articles 49, 51A. The laws like the Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Act ASR 1958 provided legal frameworks. Protection of Ajanta and the Ellora caves under the AMASR Amars Act. Culturals and revivals and state and the protonage and post-independence effort were made to the revive and traditional arts and dance and the music forms through the state patronage and schemes, e.g. establishment of institutions like the Sangeet Natak Academy 1953 and Lalit Kala Academy 1954 integrated of heritage with the development and India's adopt a balanced and approach to integrated heritage conservation with modern development, e.g. and the UNESCO World Heritage Site Statute for the sites and like the Fatehpur Sikri 1986 and Jaipur 2019 recognition of intangibles cultural heritage. India also focus on the preserving oral traditions and performing arts. Yoga and Kumbh Mela were the recognized as the UNESCO and the intangibles cultural heritage elements. Promotions of cultures and the diplomacy's heritage becomes other soft power tools to enhance international cultural relations programs 1977 and more the recently the International Day of Yoga 2024. Conclusion. India's post-independent efforts to the reclaims and preserve its the cultural heritage reflect a blend of traditional and progress. By strengthening institutional frameworks and legal the measures and the cultural diplomacy, India continues to ensure it the heritage remains the source of inspirations and unity for the future generations. The freedom struggle, its various stage and important contributions from the different part of the country. Discuss the Maulana Abul Kalam Azad and contributions to India freedom struggles and his role is in nation buildings. After independence, 10 minutes. Introduction. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad was a visionary nationalist and a the peacenik leader whose the commitment to freedoms and nation building laid the foundation for the unified and the progressive India and contributions to the freedom struggles body. Role in the Khilafat movement 1929 mobilized the Indian Muslims emphasis unity and with the Hindus. With Hindus in the fights for the independence and ease. His the leadership extended beyond the religious boundaries and fostering and a shared and the nationalism vision. Leadership in non the cooperation movement and champions peaceful and the protest and resistance and against the British rule and broadenings. The movement such movement raised the throats the the Hilal. Al Hilal al Balag. He promoted non-violence and the nationalism, advocate of Hindu Muslims unity consistently. Consistently worked and for the communal harmony and the especially during the times of the religious tensions and his roles in the Lucknow Pact in 1916 was the instruments and in the forging Hindu and the Muslims political cooperation. Congress President 1940-1946 led the Indian National Congress during the pivotal years opposing partitions and the endurings of the secular independence India. Supported the Quiet India movement 1942 and the railing supports for the independence under his the leadership. Multiple imprisonment for the independence, endured the multiple jail strains and the demonstrating his the unwavering commitment to freedoms. E.g. Imperialized in the 1930 and 1934 and during the Quiet India movement, contribution to nation buildings. Educational reforms as first the educational ministers and laid the foundations for India educational infrastructure, establishing institutions and policies for holistic learnings, e.g. funded the universities grant the commission UGC and Indians the Institution of Technology IITS and to promote the accessibility civil qualities and education for all. Sources Ministry of Education Government of India. Promoting scientific and cultural institutions and initiated and the Council of Scientific and the Industrial Resources CSIR and the Sangeet Natak Academy and the Sahitya Academy to encourage the science, cultures and arts. The established the Indian Councils for the Cultural Relations ICCR to the promotes Indian cultures globally. Champions of the secularism and the national unity advocated for the communals and harmonies in the governance in influencing the India and the secularism frameworks. His support in the Constituent and the Assembly helped the shape Article 25 and 30 on the religious freedoms. Constituent and Assembly debates. Promotion of technicals education emphasizes the practicals education to drive and India economic growth and self the religions funded the All India Councils for the Technicals Education AICTE and to standardize the technicals education. Support for women's and the minorities education advocated for the inclusive educationals and policies particularly for the women's and minorities and present and schemes under the basic education and the vocational training for the marginalized groups and visions for the social and economic progress and show the education or as other tools for the social mobilities and economic independence. His the policies and inspired and later the educational and the initiatives like the Sharva and the Shiksha Abhiyan. Conclusion. Maulana Azad legacy and leads in his the contribution to and the inclusive and the secular and progressive India has the visions and continue to inspire a nation that values knowledge, unity, and justice for all. Examine the socio-economics and factors that led to the Munda and the rebellions. How did the Birsa Mundas and ideology and leadership shapes the tribal resistance movement and introduction. The Munda rebellions of 1899 and 1900 led by the Birsa Munda was other significant tribal uprising that the exposed the social economics and the cultural pressures and faced by Indians tribal communities under the colonial rules. It is the reflected there the struggle for the autonomy and land the rights and cultural preservations body. Socio-economic factors leading to the Mundas rebellions. Land the ally nations British policies allows the outsiders and the Dikush to gain the ownerships of tribal land and the dismantling traditional communal land and systems and affecting the tribals way of life. The Chota Nagpur Tenancies Act of 1908 was the latter introduced to promote the tribal land ownerships. After the rebellions, government of Jharkhand and the exploitations by the money lenders and zamindars and tribal communities fell into the debt trap and due to the high interested loan from the money lenders and leading to bounded labors and loss of economic independence. Many mundas and were the dissolved and of theirs the land and forces into the servitude and under the exploratives and zamindars ministry of the tribal affairs 2022 forced and unpaid labors and beach the begaries and colonial authorities and the local landforms impose the forces labors making the mundas and works the without the payments and which becomes other critical grievances. The tribals and whereas the compelled to work on the zamindars owners and land without the wages postings fostering deep representment and sources tribal movement in India be the Chaudhry and religious and the cultural suppressions and missionaries and the encourages Christians conventions under meanings and tribal customs and creating the culturals and the discontent and erodings and traditions practices e.g. missionaries' activities and the impositions of foreigns and the benefits were seen as the threats to theirs the culturals and identity. Spurrings the revivals and under the Virshas and impact of the forest laws. Restrictive forest and policies limited tribal access to the forest and resources is essential for their the survival, threatening their the livelihood e.g. the Forest Act of the 1878 and restricted the hunting and gathering rights. The disrupting the mundas and traditional practices, sources, tribal rights, and land reforms. Ministry of Environment, Economics and Marginalizations and Poverty. Colonials economic policy marginalized the tribals economic, forcing many the mundas and into the low payings and jobs and furthers the entrenching poverty. The influx of the Dikus and led to loss the traditionals and livelihood livings. The Mundas economically and the vulnerables. The Birsa Mundas ideologies and leaderships. Rebellions. Revivals of the tribal's identity and unity, and Virsa the promotes other spiritual movement that the emphasis traditional beliefs and unity against the colonials and the external threat, and railings the tribals communities, the emphasis and worships of the Singh and the Bongas and Sun god and opposed the conventions and strengthens the common tribal identity, demand for the self-rule Mundas Raj, and Birsa's calls for self-government inspired the tribes to the and the feudals. Racist feudals and colonial authorized creating the vision of the autonomy and justice. His calls for the Mundas Raj united various tribal groups under other share and visions of the freedom from the exploitation, social and the morals reforms. Visha encourages reforms within the community opposing superstition and promoting clean beings, and which the fostered and unity and self-reliance and e.g. He argued and his the followers to avoid the alcohol and other the vibes and promoting the discipline and within the community resistance through the organized and the military, unlike the previous and passive revolts, and Birsa mobilized the Mundas into and the organized and militant forces and targeting colonial symbols of power. His the followers attacked police and stations and British officers, challenging the colonial administration's control the Indian freedom struggles. Military of tribal affairs, economics upliftment ideas. Birsha aimed at the economic self and the sufficiency and urging tribes to reclaim there's the land and the resources and the fostering a models of the economics independent. He the encourages the mundas pupils to resist the paying taxes to landforms and the reclaim and lost land role as other messiahs figures, and Virsha was seen as other divine leaders and the messianic features and unitings and pupils under other common religious and the social cues that the enhances his the influences kg and knowledge as the dharti and abha Dharti and Abha, fathers of the earth, and Birsa spirituals aura and reinforces loyalty and the moral among the Mundas. Conclusion: the Munda rebellions and driven by the socials and economics discontents and led by the Virsha Mundas and visionaries ideology left and the endurance and legacy in tribal resistance against the exploitations and colonial rule. His movement remains the powerful symbols of tribal rights, unity and autonomy influences tribal activities in India's even today. Question: discuss the social and political significance of Rani Lakshmibai leadership during the revolt of 1857 and its impact of Indian society. And 10. Introduction. Rani Lakshmibai, the Queen of Jhansi, and stood as other towerings and features of courage and defiance. And during the revolt of 1857, her the leadership symbolized the resistance to British imperialism, and while her the actions transcended and higher eras to inspire the societal transformations. body. Role in the revolt of 1857, resistance to the doctrine of lapse, and she refused to accept the annexations of Jhansi, highlighting her politicals and acumen and her leaderships after her the husband and death in the 1853 and set the precedent for the defining and colonial policies and tactical military leaderships. Lakshmi Bai's showcased exceptions and strategies and plannings and courage in the defense of Jhansi and during the battle lays in Kalpi and Gwalior. Her alliance with the Tantia Thatya Tope and escape from the Jhansi to regroup force the demonstrated her and the tactical brilliance, leadership under the pressure, and despite limited resources and the betrayal by the some loyal allies see the maintained Jhansi and defiance for the month and against other superior British forces. Her fight against the Sir and the Hug rose in 1850 and remained the milestones in Indians' resistance, symbols of organized and rebellions. Lakshmi Bai unified the diverse and factions of rebellions and under her the leaderships and turning the Jhansi into other nerve center for the revolt. Regional leaders and soldiers across the Bundelkhand supports her the leaderships during the uprising, socio-political significant symbols of anti-colonial resistance. Her the deficiencies becomes other rally point against the British imperialism and inspiring the features uprisings. Her leadership influences resistance natives such as the Santhan and Indigo rebellions, breaking gender stereotypes. As the widow and ruler, she defined the patriarchal norms and demonstrated that women could lead in both the governments and war. Her the legacy has been celebrated as the pioneers of women empowerment in India. Fosterings regionals and unity. She mobilized local leaders and citizens and soldiers across resigns the fostering collective actions against the British rule, and her the alliance with the leaders in Kalpi and the Gwalior underscores her role in the regions and unifications, catalyst for the cultures and the national's identity. Lakshmi Bai and the resistance and the reinvigorated Indians' cultural pride and national identity. The poems Jhansi Ki Rani and by the Subhadra and Kumari Chauhan immortalized and her in the India's and freedom narratives, promotions of local government, her the temporary rule in Jhansi during the revolt and showcase the effective government and resources and mobilization. She recognized the military and economic to sustain the Jhansi's defense, impact on Indian society. Inspiration for the future freedom struggles, her the bribery and becomes other touchstones for the freedom fighters in the latter struggle for independence. The Rani of Jhansi and the regiment in the Subhash Chandra Bose and INA was named in her the honors and legacy of the nationalism, her the deficiencies and symbolized the early and the stirrings of Indian nationalism and influences movement like the Swadeshi and non-cooperation movement. Her story was recounted in the speeches by the leaders like the Mahatma Gandhi and the Jawaharlal Nehru. Role models for the women in leadership. Lakshmi Bai, a story continues to inspire women to take the leadership role across the sectors. Numerous public and the institution and award are named after her to the honor and her courage and leadership, strengthening cultures and identity. Her actions and rejuvenated India resistance cultures and highlighted the role of local heroes in shaping the Indian identity. e.g. folk songs and played the continue to celebrated her in the states and likes the Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh eternalized in the historical memories and heard the narratives and the bridges regionals and the nationals and struggles positioning her as a the timeless heroes celebrations celebrated annually on the 19th November her and the birth anniversary as other day of the women's empowered conclusion Rani Lakshmi Bai's and leaderships during the revolt of 1857 was other landmarks in the Indian resistance transcending socio-political barriers and inspiring a the unified nationalism identity her the legacy continued to the echo in the modern Indias and empowering the individuals to challenge the operations and strive for the equality and justice to what the extent and did the Arya and Samaj contributes to the Indians and the religious and social resistance during the colonial period. Introduction The Arya Samaj, founded by the Swami and Dayanand Saraswati in 1875, was the pivotal reformist and movement focused on the reviving and Vedic cultures and addressing the regressive practices. It play a significant role in the modernizing Hindu society while facing the challenges in scopes and the inclusively body contribution to the religious and the renaissance. The revivals of the Vedic and ideas and Arya Samaj and the emphasis the monotheism and rejected Philiothesis and idols worships and rituals and promoting the Vedic principles. Example Swami Dayanand and looked book and the Satyarth and Prakash in 1875 become other cornerstones of its the ideology. Opposition to superstitions and blinds the rituals the Samaj and campaigned and against the astrologies, animal sacrifice and others the superstitions promoting rationals and inequalities. Organized Vedic and yajnas as the simplified and meaningful worships practices and versions through the Suddhi and the movement. It is the launch the Suddhi and movement to reconvert those who had converted to other the religious and reinforcing Hindu unity. The conventions of the Malkhanas and Rajput in the early 20th century becomes other notable success. Critics of the sectarianism, Arya Samaj opposed the division within the Hindus and the advocating the religious unifications. Compositions against the divisive and practices like the Shaivism and the Vaishnavism and strengthened the reforms and agendas. Promotions of rationals and spirituals. It is the promoted the balance between the faith and the religious, encouraging education and logics in the religious practices, and e.g. and inspired the nationalism leaders like the Lala Lajpat Rai and who adopt the Arya and ideals for the reforms. Contributions to social and the Renaissance. Renaissance and the advancement of women rights and Arya Samaj supported and widow and remarriage, opposed the child marriages and the promoted and the woman education, funded the Kanya and the Gurukul 1919 to empower the women through the learnings and abolitions of caste and discriminations. It is the rejected untouchabilities and the supported intercaste marriages and dainings. Legal the recognition of intercaste marriages and conducted by the Arya Samaj and centers contributed to the social integrations. Education for all. It is the established modern the educational institutions combining the seculars and Vedic learnings, the Dayanand and Anglo and Vedic Dev and the schools established in the 1886 and educated the leaders like the Bhagat Singh and the oppositions to the social evils. Arya Samaj activities and compositions against the Sati and Dowry and others the regressive customs. Efforts against the Dowry inspired the reforms in the northern Indias and the Source and the Radha Krishnans and committee reports. And four, fostering nationalism through the reforms by the allegiance and social reforms with the patriotism. And Arya Samaj fueled the nationalism and the sentiments. Leaders like the Lala Lajpat Rai and the combine the Arya teachings and with the nationalism activities. Limitations in religious and social reforms, the regionals and the concentrations. Arya Samaj influences by the largely continued to the northern and western India, limiting its reach. E.g., minimal presence in the southern and the northeastern regions. Minimal presence in the southern and the northeastern region, communals and tensions for the Suddhi and the movement, the conventions and the compositions. Occasionally हाँ मोए नहीं है पतो बाकी communal tensions from the Suddhi and the movement, the reconventionals and compositions, occasionally and stipulated into the enters the religious tension, e.g. and the Malawars Road and 1921 highlighted the resistance to such and the effort exhibitions focus on the Vedic revivals. It is the emphasis on the returning to Vedic traditions and out overlooks the evolution of Hinduism in the latter period. Criticism like the Rabindranath Tagore in emphasis are the broader understandings of the Hinduism and the neglected of the inclusively. Arya Samaj and reforms did not the adequately and address the plight of the marginalized and communities, especially the Dalits, and limited focus on the issues faced by the Dalits women. Rigid ideological and the stances. It's the strong and the oppositions to ideas the worships alienated and the traditional Hindus and limitings the it's the mass and the affairs. Orthodox groups like the Sanathan and the Dharma Shubha and the resistance and Arya Samaj initiatives. Conclusion. Arya Samaj's significant contributions to India's and the religious and social renaissance and advocating education, rationalism and the equity, and despite the regional and the ideological limitations, it's the effort laid the fundamental for the progressives and reforms to the address the contemporaries challenges. Arya Samaj principles and must the evolve to foster greater inclusivity and the adaptability. Examines the legacy of the Jyotiba Phule's in the shapings India's social political landscapes and how have his ideas and influences the subsequent reforms movement. Introduction. Jyotiba Phule is the revolutionary reformers challenged caste oppressions, gender inequalities, and the religious orthodoxy in 19th century India and his the visionaries ideas and shaped early the anti and caste and the social equalities movement and that the influences India's fight from the independence body. Legacy of the Jyotiba Phule in shaping India's social political landscapes. Education for the marginalized communities. Phule emphasized and the universal educations for the Dalits and women to counter and caste hegemonies. E.g. established the first and the girls' schools in Pune 1848 and with the Sati Savitri Bai and Phule. Formations of the Satya Sodhak and the Samaj. The organization 1873 and promoted and equality and social justice and rejecting the caste-based discriminations and e.g. encouraged and Dalits to perform rituals without the Brahmins and priests and critics of the Brahminicals and the patriarchies and he the exposed the oppressive religious structures and that the justifies caste and gender inequality. Authored and the Ghulam Giris in 1873 comparing and caste-based exploitations to slavery and focus on the gender inequalities. He compositions against the child marriages, sati and the widows and the exploitations advocating for the women's rights and e.g. opened the shelters for the widows and the rape and victims and alongside Savitri Bai Phule and the economic empowerment of lower caste. He strengthened the agrarian reforms and economic justice to challenge the caste-based operations and his the advocacy influences later the movement for the land and redistributions and the tent rights simplifications of rituals. Fule proposed the inclusive and the ceremonies that the inclusion included and the Brahminical dominances. E.g. introduced the Sarvajanic Satya Dharmas and pujas to fosters the equalities and the questionings the religious orthodoxy. Fule challenges the inscription in scriptures legitimizing caste and operation, encouraging rational inequalities, e.g. Critic and the Manusmriti for its the caste-based doctrines, building other Bahujans' identity and fully united the Dalits, OBCs and the others oppressed groups and under other collective and Bahujans and identity. His and the ideals inspired the early and known and the Brahminical movement. Influence of Phule ideas on the reforms movement till the independence era. Influences on Mahatma Gandhi anti and caste the compositions. Gandhi focused on the upliftings and Harijans, Dalits and his the ideas of basic educations and the accord and Phule emphasis on the equalities through the educations and Gandhi adopted the practices like the cleaning toilets to the challenges caste and the hierarchies and impact on the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Ambedkar drew the extensively and from the Phule principles of education and caste annihilations to develop his against the anti-caste movement. E.g. Ambedkar regarded Phule as his the guru and often the referred to his works in his the speeches. Justice Party in Tamil Nadu. Phule's ideology inspired the Justice Party 1916 and which the fought for the non-Brahminical representation in the administrations and educations, e.g. introduced the representation policies in Madras Presidency and from the marginalized and caste and self-respected movement and Periyar's and compositions against the Brahmins' dominions in the Tamil Nadu and the draw from the Phule anti-Brahminical stance and advocated for the intercaste marriages and widow and the remarriages and Dalits the constituencies and in the freedom struggles Phule ideas inspired the Dalit leaders to assert their rights and during the independence movement and movements like the depressed and the classes conference and the 1920 focus on the social reforms and the alongside the political independence. Peasant movement and the economics and the justice fully focus on the agrarians and equalities influences the movement like the Kisan and the Sabha movement 1936 and during the independence struggle. Tenant farmers in Bihar and Bengal and took the inspirations and from his the visions for the economics reforms. advocacy and for the equality in the Congress movement, and leaders like the Pandit and the Ramabai and the early and Congress social reformers adopted fully focus on the women's educations and the caste equalities, e.g. Congress regions and upliftment and compositions in the 1920 reflected his and the influences impact on the yearly constitutional debates. Fully emphasis on the equalities and the educations becomes the fundamentals for the demands of social justice in the 1930 EG. Thus, the demands were the discussed in the platforms like the round tables conference. Conclusion. Jyotiba Phule and ideas and the ignited and the movement for the social justice and that the intervened and with the India's and independence struggle. His focus on the education, caste and the annihilations and the genders equalities and provided the roadmap for and the egalitarians and society inspired the leaders to the envisions the free and the India founded on the inclusion and inequality. Post independence colonizations and recolonizations within the country. Jawaharlal Nehru and beliefs and that the scientific temples was the essential for the national progress and analyze how this the belief and was the reflected in his the policies and the discuss its the relevance for the modern India and the scientific and the aspirations. 15 minutes. Introduction. Jawaharlal Nehru and the envisioned and the scientific temples as the foundation of other rationals and the self-sufficiency and India's essentials for the national progress and the global relevance body and the scientifics and the temples as essential for the national progress and the Nehru considered and the scientific temples crucial to the dismantle links and the colonials and the legacies and promoting the criticals and thinkings and the enabling India's growth as a the self and the relevance and promoter progressive nations industrials modernizations. A scientific approach was the necessary and for the industrial growth and inducing the dependence on the colonials economics and heavy and the industrial community. 1945 1945 focused on the building and the indigenous industrial capabilities. Nations and building science and the rationalities and were seen and the unifying and forces and promoting the national identity and the cohesion. Article 51 AH of the Constitution promotions the development of other scientific tempers and among the citizens and economic independence. Scientifics and development was key and to the agriculture industrials and technological self-sufficiency. Nehru supports for the scientific agriculture leads to the initiative that the paved the way for the green revolutions. How this the belief was reflected in his the policies. Establishment of key institutions. Nehru funded institutions like the Indian Institutions of Technology IITs and Indian Council of Scientific and Industrial Research ICSIR to drive the innovations and build the skills workforce, e.g. IIT Kharagpur and was established in 1951 setting the model for technical education in India, space and the nuclear programs. Nehru and support and led into the formations of Indian Space Research Organization ISRO and Atomic Energy Commissions AEC and the crucials and for the technological self and religions. ISRO Mars Orbital Missions 2014 and the showcases the impact of thus and the foundations on the India and the space sources and specific scientifically and policy resolutions in 1958. This landmark policy underscored and the science as the central to the national development and boosting the research and fundings, and it is the spurred and supports and for the Department of Atomic Energies and long term scientific investment. Promotion of scientifics and temples. Nehru advocacy for the rationals and the thinking was the embedded in the constitutions and Article 51 AH and the emphasizing secularism and the modernity. His and the speeches on the reasons and progress are and the reflected in recent the education reforms and the promoting the inquiries and based the learnings. Agricultural universities. Recognizing agricultural roles, Nehru established and the research-based the universities to advance farming techniques. Agriculture University is the Pantnagar and 1916 and pioneer research led the farming practices and industrial resources. Nehru and the promoted industrial resources to establish the self-reliance in manufacturing and the technology. Steel and plants and Bokaro were the developed and with others visions of the technological self-sufficiencies. Relevance for the modern India, scientific and the aspirations and self-reliance in technology. Nehru and the emphasis on the indigenous capabilities under and the pen and the initiative like the Atmanir Bhar Bharat and for the technical independence. Easy. Recent push for the domestics and the defense and productions to reduce the imports. Digital and space advancement. Nehru the space scientific and infrastructure supports and current the ambitions in space and digital sectors. Gyanyan mission and under ISRO and planned for the human space flight and by the 2024. Agricultural research and the resiliences. The yearly focus on the agriculture resources remains the crucial and as the climates and changes challenges and India's food and securities. Millet Mission 2023 and in the International Year of Millets to promote the resiliences crops UNFAO. STEM educations and focus the inspired and by the Nehru current and policies the prioritizing STEM educations to the fosters innovations. National Education Policy 2020 and focused on the criticals and the thinkings and the scientific inequalities. Boosting the research and development R&D and the modern policies ally with the Nehru's and visions the emphasizing R&D and to address the India's and socio and economics issues and the services science and technology innovation policies and STIP and 2020 aims to raise the R&D and spendings to 2% of GDP and strengthening the fundamental duties. Nehru the inclusions of the scientific temples in the fundamentals duties reform informs the presents and informed and to enhances the scientific literacy public and the compositions by the Ministry of the Science to counter the myths and the formation in society. Conclusion rooted in Nehru and visions the India's journey and towards the sustainable knowledge and drive and grow the alliance and with other global futures in science and technology, positioning India as other leaders in innovations, history of the world and will the includes the event from the 18th century such the industrials such industrial revolutions and world wars and the red rovers and national boundaries and colonization decolonizations politicals philosophers like the communals capitalism socialism etc and their the forms and the effect on the society silent features of the Indian society diversity of India. Discuss the role of the tolerant and the inclusively in promoting the social harmony and within other diverse and society and how does the Indians and civilization embodies and thus the values and 10 minutes introductions and tolerant and the inclusively and are the vitals to fostering and the social harmony allowing the diverse and communities to coexist and peacefully and within the complex society like the India's bodies and role of the tolerant in the social harmony. peaceful coexistence. Tolerant creates and as the environment where the diverse and communities can live and the harmoniously and without the conflict. Coexistence of multiple religions in the Keralas and showcases the India's tolerance in the actions, reduce the social and the polarizations and encourages respect for the diverse and belief and reducing the socio and the diversity devices. And articles 25 of the Indian constitution which guarantees freedoms of the religious and ran and forces tolerances, strengthened and democratic principles tolerant uphold and the principles of uphold and freedom of expressions and the democratic ideals. Mahatma Gandhi's and the Sarvodayas and emphasis the tolerant and inclusiveness in a the harmonious society. Role of inclusiveness in the social and the harmony. Integrations of marginalized communities and inclusively and the ensures and equals the representations and for fostering social unity. Reservation policies for the SC and the ST OBCs and the encourages educational and the employment opportunities, promotes and education stabilities, inclusively development and minimize the socio-economically disparities. Skilled India Mission 2015 and supports the marginalized groups and promoting the education inclusiveness and reinforces nationals and identity inclusively in national culture and the festivals foster unity, e.g. celebration of Diwali, Eid and the Christian Christmas and across India's and strengthen the shared identity. Indian civilization as and the embodiment of the tolerance and the inclusively and the religious and the pluralism. Ancient texts like the Rig Vedas and the embraced the ideas of multiple path to the truth and the ekam and the sat and the vipra and bahudha vadanti. Cultures and the integrations and Indians and the history reflected a the blend of cultures like the Mughals in era and which and the harmonized and the Persians and Indian traditions. Influences of visionaries, leaders and historical features like the Ashokas and Akbars promoted and tolerance and through the Dhammas and Deen-e-Ilahi. Constitutionalists when values the preambles of the Indian Constitution in shrines and justice and equality and the fraternities and alliety and with the Indian historical ethos. Conclusion. In other globally and the polarizations eras and India's volumes of the tolerations and the inclusively and the strengthened its the social and fabric and offers other model of units in diversity and the crucial for the buildings is the harmonious and the resilience features. Role of women and women organization population and associations issues and powers and development. Powers and development. Examine the social physiological implications of risings and screens and times the amongst the children in India. How can society and policy interventions address the challenges of screen and the addictions to promote the historicals, holistics and development? 15 minutes introductions. With screen times for the children in India and increasing the significantly post the pandemics and concern and about its the effect on there's the socials and the physiologicals and development are the intensified and promoting a need for the balance interventions bodies. Social implications of rising screen time. Reduce the social interactions and the exhibits and screen times and decrease the face to face and the interactions hindering socials and skills and development. age. A 2024 an NCRT study and found that the children and with over the 3 hours of daily screen time can show the lowest levels of social and engagement. Weekend family bonds and screens often the replaced and the family interactions and reducing the families and cohesions and shared the experiences. Families are the observed to spend less times on the activities like the meals and the conversations impacting and emotionals and connectivities. India's Academy of Pediatrics 2023 delay the social skills and development children's increasingly and reliance on the digital interactions and may the struggles and within the person's social and cues and relationships. UNICEF and reforms. UNICEF reports that the high screen times and among the adolescent and correlates with the delayed and emotional regulations. Reduce the participations in the physical activities, screen the addictions and limits and time spent in the physical activities leading to the sedentary and behaviors. The Ministry of the Health 2023 report highlighted the 40% decrease in the outdoor and activities among the urban children. Physiological implications of expensive screen use, increasing the anoxes and the depression. High the screen time the correlates and with the mental and health issues and such as the anxiety and the depressions among the children. And Lancet and Child and Adolescent Health 2024 found a 15% increase in the anxiety and the symptoms among the adolescent and with the over 4 hours of screen times. Attention deficits and issues. The prolonged and the exposures to first and past digital content can lead to the reduced the attention span and concentrations levels. And studies by the AIMS and Delhi 2023 link the excessive screen use to higher ADHD like the symptoms in children, sleep and the disruptions. Screens light exposures and affected sleeps and cycles, leading to the insufficient sleeps and lowers and cognition functions. A 2023 study by the Indian Journal of Pediatrics reported that the 60% of children using the screen before the bedtimes and had the disturbed and sleep patterns. Impact on the self-esteem and social media's use the often influences self-esteem, especially in adolescents due to the unrealistic comparisons and cyber bullying. And Nimham and 2024 found that the 25% of the Indian teens experience self and esteems and the issues from the exceptions, social medium and exposures, society and the policies interventions to address the screen addictions. Parental education programs equip and the parents with the tools to manage the children's screen times and promotes the behavior healthier habits and easy Indian and the academies of the pediatric and the recommends the workshops for the parents on the digital management. School based digital literacy includes the digitals and well-beings in the curriculums and to take the responsible screen usage from other early ages. The Delhi government has introduced and digitals and literacy sessions in sections schools. Select school regulated screen time and guidelines, developed official screen time guidelines and based on the age and promotes them and through the public compositions who guidelines and suggest the screen time and the restrictions based on the development stages. promotion of physical social activities and encourages outdoors and the groups activities to balance the digital consumptions with the healthy socials and the interactions. The Khelo India initiatives and promotes the physicals and the fitness among the children indirectly and reducing the screen times. Incentives and for the digital detox and the programs and encourages the development of tech free and zones and the digital detox programs in school and the communities. Some schools have started screen free days and to help the children engage. Conclusion: effective management of screen times and required other multi stakeholder approach involving families, educators and the policy makers, and ensuring other balanced digital environmental will be the crucial and for the holistic growth of the next generation, fostering the resiliences and well-rounded society. Examine the major challenges faced by the women in the digital space. Digital space, especially in the context of the artificial intelligence generated the contract and what step and can be the taken. Can be taken by tech companies and the government to the mitigates and this problem. Introductions: the rise of the AI and the generated contract has the exacerbated the challenges faced by the women in digital spaces, leading to new and the forms of online harassments and the primary privacy violations, and this has the necessitated an urgent action from both the tech companies and the government body. The challenges faced by the women in digital space in the context of artificial intelligence generated contact and deep and faked and the artificial intelligence based and the many manipulations. Artificial intelligence is being used to create the deep fake videos and image and the targeting women and with fabricated contest that is often the sexual is natures or the defamatories and example. Kamala Harris and the US and the vice president faced and the deep and the fakes and the portraying and her in the flesh and damaging the context during her the 2024 presidential run. Misinformation and the disinformation, artificial intelligence tools and the spread false and narratives.
जा क्या जाओ कौन सा मुसर क्या रहा मुसर क्या रहा दे मो बाबा जा आरती बाबा क्या चल बाबा क्या जाओ क्या दे क्या जावे का नहीं कह रहा चल तू जा आरती जा चल जा यहाँ से चल निकाल चलो ये लग जाएगी
Misinformation and the disinformation, artificial tools and spread the flash natives or the misogynistic contacts and designed to the undermine women's and characteristics and credibilities, particularly targeting and women's in the leadership's roles. and Nikki Haley and the during the Republicans and primarily and was are the victims of the manipulated images and fake news objectifications and the sexual harassment, and women face the proportionated and level of the obligation and the sexual and the exhibited and context online emphasified and by the artificial intelligence, especially to the to the generation and the realistics and fake contact the eg the women face and the disproportionated and the levels of the objectifications and the sexually and explicit and context the online emphasis by the artificial intelligence obliterate and to generate the realistic fake and the contest the artificial intelligence and generated the excited and image of the Italians prime minister and the Georgians and the melody circulated and the widely on social media violation of privacy and rights, and artificial intelligence generated the deep fakes and the alterated images and violate the women's and privacies, often the resulting in the significant reputations and damages and mental distress and Rumeens. Farhanas are the Bangladeshi politicians and was the targeted and with the deep fakes and contest ahead of elections. Step to mitigate the problems by the tech companies and the governments and tech companies. Enhances the contest and modernizations companies must the invent and in the advanced and artificial detection systems to flag and remove harmful contact and the proactively and before it's the wide and circulation related with the human and the oversight खराब हो जाएगा वो अब ताता हो जाएगी बाँ में ठीक है समझ नहीं आ रही ट्रांसपेरेंसी एंड द अकाउंटेबिलिटी अरे ताता हो जाएगी बच्चे में ताता हो जाएगी ताता और वो टूट Transparency and accountability platforms should provide the clear accountabilities and measures and reports how they handle tracked contest within the transparency audits of their the modernizations policy EU Digital Service Act 2022 and mandate the digital platforms to report the contact and modernizations actions. Ethical artificial intelligence development tech companies and need to the ensure that the algorithm and are the designed in other gate, in other way, and there the reduced genders why and the prevent the misuse of the artificial intelligence tools for the harmful and purposes, e.g. Google's and artificial intelligence principles highlighted the responsibilities use of the artificial intelligence, but more the implementations is needed. The government Mr. Stronger's legal frameworks and government should implement should implement and enforce the data protection laws and create the specific legal provisions to address the artificial intelligence generation context abuse, the including and the feedback. The facts and the specialist law. India's information technology intermediary and the guidelines and digital media's ethics code and rules and 2021 provided other framework for the context and modernizations but lacked the statement artificial intelligence specific rule. Artificial intelligence ethics regulations. Government must the establish artificial intelligence ethics the boards and frameworks. This the mandate ethical artificial intelligence development focusing on the preventing the gender based discriminations. The European Union Artificial Intelligence Act aimed to regulate the high risk and artificial intelligence, particularly in media and the surveillances, the cyber security, education and awareness, and government should end the initiative and public awareness compositions on identified and reporting the deep fake and content the specialists and IMs and aimed at the vulnerable groups. India's national cyber crimes and reportings. India's National Cyber Crimes and Reports the portal facilitated easy the reportings of cyber crimes and including those involving the artificial intelligence generated content. Fines and the penalties and the take companies and should be the hold and the accountables and through the monetaries and the penalties and for the failings to remove the harmful context and within the stipulated and times the frameworks. GDPR in the EU and allows for the hefty and fines on the companies and that fail to protect and the users from the data and the misuse and conclusions. A proactive and the multilateral approach and between the governments, tech firms and the civil society and will ensures the creations of suffers and digital species and for the boomers and for steerings and ethicals and artificial intelligence and development and the stronger online protections and informal and the statement and are the particularly and the vulnerable to the climates and changes impact. Discuss the socio-economically factors and that the contribute to this the vulnerabilities and the suggest ways to address them. 15 marks. Informal settlements and characteristic by the inadequate infrastructures and high the population densities and the highly and the vulnerabilities to the climate changes impact and with over other billions peoples and the living in those and the areas they are the disproportionalities affected by the extreme weather event like the floods and heat waves and storms. Body vulnerabilities of international settlements to the climate changes, lack of the resiliences infrastructures, formal settlements and lack the proper and drainage, strong buildings materials and best the management system increasing. And there's the vulnerabilities to the extremes and weathers. In 2023, heavy rain in the Keralas and Ugandas led to the severe flooding in the informal areas exhibited and by the poor and drainage and infrastructures. Location in high risk zone. Informals and settlements are often the situations in environmental vulnerable areas like the floodplains, hilly sites and the coastal areas which face the highlighted the climate risk. Rio de Janeiro and the favelas and the frequently suffers landslides during the rainy seasons, and due to theirs the hillsides and locations impacting thousands of the residents. Overcrowding is the population's density. High density living the conditions and increase the risk ensures the limitings and space for the evacuations, and the war sannings diseases spread the Mumbai, Dharavi and one of the world and the densest slums and faced the heightened COVID-19 and monsoon the challenges due to the overcrowded conditions. Socio-economically factor contributions to vulnerabilities and loss. Vulnerabilities to low income and the poverty and residents have the limited income to invest in the climate's resiliences, housing or the resources restricting, and there's the adapting capabilities and dwellers in the sub and the Saharan and African lives the below the poverty line and living those the highly exposed to climate's risk. Limited access to health services. Poor access to health care the facility and sanitations, and versus the impact of the climates in dust and the diseases, and the especially after the extreme events, e.g. Dhaka slums and face the annual dangerous outbreaks and due to the stagnant and water coast and monsoons with limited health infrastructures and exacerbating and the diseases spread the unregulated urban growth and rapid and the affiliated and the urbanizations leads to the lack of the basic services like the clean water and sanitation's heightening vulnerabilities, e.g. the Kenyas and the Kiveras and unplanned and growth has the overwhelmed sanitation systems leading to the frequent health crises after the flooding event. Socio inequalities. Vulnerability groups including the women, elderly and the children are more expected to risk in thus the settings. United Nations Women reported that the women in the Manila and informal areas are the more affected by the typhoons aftermaths and due to the limited access to the resources and safe space. Lack of legal tenures without property rights, and residents are often the resident and to invest in the durable infrastructures, making homes and more the vulnerable. And Rio de Janeiro fails she low an investment in housing the investment due to the absence of land tenures, increasingly risk of the infrastructural damages. Way to the address and the vulnerabilities. Way to the address on the vulnerability. Upgrading infrastructures, improve the basic infrastructure such as the drainage, sanitations and solid waste management in the informal settlements. The Mumbai and the Climate Action Act Plan 2022 includes the upgraded to the stormwater drainage in vulnerability slums areas. Community-based climates and resilience programs involve local communities in the climate resistance measures, the awareness and compositions and emergencies response trainings, and e.g. Ahmedabad heats actions plans involved involve slum and the residential in heats and waves, the preparedness and reducing the health risk in extreme the temperatures, affordable climate residence housings promotes the affordable housings worlds and to the withstand climates and extreme the reducing the exposures and to the hazard. The Ethiopians and integrated housing development programs provided the affordable climates and resiliences homes and for the low incomes and resided in the Addis Ababas and inclusive urban and the plannings. Integrate informal settlements into the city plannings to ensure access to the infrastructures, healthcare and the emergencies services and the Kigalis and urban the master plans in the Rwandas and the integrated informal areas, prioritizing access to the sanitations and the resiliences housings, financial supports and the microfinancials offers low interest loan and subsidize over the microfinancials to enabled resiliences to upgraded homes and access emergency resources. The slums and dwellers internationals SDIs provides the microfinancials for the housing involvement in improvement in settlements across the Asias and Africas. Increasingly the investment in the climate resiliences infrastructure adequate fundings is the needed to build and the resiliences urban the systems as the UN and the estimated a the shortfall of 4.5 trillion per year in the global urban climate finance. Conclusion: addressing climate vulnerabilities in the informal settlements in required is the multi-dimensional inclusively approach and that the integrated infrastructures, financial support and community resiliences by the prioritizing climate resiliences in formal settlements and cities and can the safeguard vulnerable populations and fosters more the sustainable urban environment. Thank you guys. This session will be closed. Bye bye. Next sessions आज से देखते हैं.